Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session titled Food System Sustainability Business Strategy to Future-Proof Food Security. I would now like to invite our moderator for this session, Mr. Oliver Turchett, Director of Sustainability at Museum Mars Group, to join us up front.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Very glad to moderate this panel today. I will call on our panelists of today. I would like to start with Ms. Shyamali Wakamasinghe from CBL, Group Managing Director of CBL from Sri Lanka. You have the other first. You can pick whichever one you like. So CBL is being one of Sri Lanka's largest FMCG conglomerates. I would like to call the second panelist, Mr. James Leeson, from Scholars of Sustenance Foundation, who is the Global Director for Impacts and Operation. Scholars of Sustenance is a foundation which is rescuing food, well, that's the way I would put it, in Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines, partnering with quite a few large hospitality groups, but not only, and negating food systems inefficiencies, possibly, hopefully, trying anyways. And our third panelist for today is Dr. Jörn Schmidt from World Fish. Jörn is the Director for Sustainable Aquatic Food Systems, and World Fish is a leader in research and innovation in the realm of sustainable aquaculture and fisheries. So rather a diverse panel, and our topic of the day is, as you know, better than me, most likely, food system sustainability, business strategies to future-proof food security. But first, to get us maybe a bit more in the mood, I think we will shortly dim the lights, so do not be surprised, it's not a power cut. And I think the organizers have very kindly prepared an audio introduction to this session. So let's see if you recognize the sound and if you can see from where to where it goes in the supply chain. Thank you. So we'll put on the lights on again. So I don't know if you recognize, but actually it went, I'm not going to say backwards, but it went from fork to farm and not the other way around. So just in case you were a bit confused, no, it didn't start by chopping things or chopping trees. It was actually chopping board. And today, so we are going to be talking quite a lot about food, obviously, and how the supply chain works and who is in the supply chain and who does what well and not so well. We're going to have a first session of questions that I'm going to ask this panel, and we'll see how these answers go and if it brings more thinking, more questions. Then we have time for some Q&A for 10, 15 minutes, depending on how talkative we get on this panel. And at the very end, we'll have a summary by Mr. Ratnesh Jha, the Executive Director, there you are, of the UNGC network for India. Sorry, I'm so used to saying Indonesia. But first I'll say maybe a few words about Indonesia, by the way, partly, but also about a topic we're not going to touch in the panel tonight, but about palm oil a little bit. Why do I want to talk about palm oil? Because it's quite an important supply chain as well, and it's a very critical supply chain, but we need maybe to think, what are we doing about it? So today, what does it mean for palm oil to future-proof? What does it mean for vegetable oils to future-proof? The champion of vegetable oils will be palm oil today. It's very concentrated. If you look at where palm oil is produced, largely today, it's mostly here in this region, Indonesia, Malaysia, Indonesia being the champion. If you make a map of vegetable oil producing countries in the world, you have one that sticks out, and it's Indonesia. And we got there because it was the most efficient crop to grow in Indonesia and Malaysia. We have the perfect climate to grow it, but also because smallholders, small farmers moved to growing a lot of palm as well. And why? Because not only is it easy to grow in the tropics, it's also easy to sell for farmers. So it was actually a very good cash crop for them. And they realized that they had quite an opportunity there. Did they do it with a lot of help? Well, in this country, in Malaysia, quite a lot. They were very supported by the government. In Indonesia, a lot less. They found the opportunity, and the supply chain created themselves a bit naturally, at least upstream. Downstream, very professional, very business-oriented supply chains that today not only provide food, but also provide cosmetics, provide fuel, and it's become a really critical supply chain. It's very professional, very big businesses, very efficient, very profitable for farmers, for the businesses themselves, for the users as well. Very easy to use products, very good for consumers. But are we too business-oriented and not enough future-oriented? Have we done our homework in terms of future-proofing palm oil? There's a lot of challenges that remain. Who are going to be the farmers of tomorrow? That's a major challenge in palm. We seem to believe that because it's profitable and because it's a good crop for smallholders, it will remain so forever. Is that so? Rubber was a great crop. Look at what's happened to that. Where are the rubber growers today? Very few of them. The price of rubber is not helping. But where are the Thai rubber growers? They've all disappeared. Their children went to university and they disappeared. Who wants to be a farmer? Have we really future-proofed the palm oil supply chain for that? We seem to consider it so great. Is it really so? What do the farmers want? They want to put their kids through university as well. How do we future-proof that? Obviously, we have climate change as well. Have we really future-proofed? The varieties we have developed in our industry, are they going to withstand climate change? Can they cope with more marginal weathers? Maybe not. Maybe yes. Have we done enough our homework there? And then you have the physical supply chain. Have we done enough to prepare for problems in the Middle East so that suddenly our transit time takes forever? Have we prepared also the fact that, like I said, Indonesia accounts today for a vast amount of the palm oil which is grown? I won't even give you the percentage, it's scary. But what happens? What if anything happens to Indonesia? What do we do? So we have there, in my opinion, a very, very nice crop, a critical crop, but have we done enough to future-proof it? Well, we have done, some of us do a lot of investment in small farmers. So we're trying to future-proof it. We have a lot of minds doing varieties, breeding. Maybe they can start thinking about how do you do with future weather patterns? How do you make it so that you maintain productivity of the palms? How do we make it so that the palms can produce still well and not be stressed if we put less fertilizer on them, so that we reduce our impact? Maybe because there will be less fertilizer available tomorrow. Or maybe because we want to expand palm in marginal areas to support the development of palm, let's say in India, where it's critically necessary. So I'm not so sure that we've done so great in our sector, but we have a lot in our hands to do a lot better and to future-proof that sector. And that's what we're going to be talking tonight about. It's about how do we future-proof things? How do we think about what comes next? How do we keep not only the supply chains open and working, but also how do we start using what should be better for the environment, better for nutrition, better for farmers? And how do we make it so that the consumer finds still that, yes, actually, I do want that. I do not just want my normal food. What if I have to start thinking about what are better foods? How do we make it so that people make that kind of choice? So I hope that was not too long. I hope I didn't spoil too much of the plot. And if you do not mind, I'll ask a few questions to our panelists. And I will start with you, Dr. Schmidt or Jörn. Aquaculture. So, okay, I know it's not only about aquaculture, but China has really massively increased its aquaculture production. Aquaculture, I'm not talking about wild catch, I'm talking about production of aquaculture, as a whole. And so the data says that China should account for 50-60% of the aquaculture production by 2030. And they will be leaving everybody behind, just like at the Olympics. I'm just saying that. But what can be done at scale, in your opinion, to increase production of aquatic foods? Should we go the Chinese way? Should we take a page from their book? Are there limitations to that model? Are there other models altogether? What is your thought about that, or your thoughts? I think we have a microphone for you, but I'll give you mine.
Okay, I'm taking the microphone from the moderator. That's always dangerous. So thank you very much for the question, and I won't go too much into detail in relation to the growth that we see in aquaculture in China. And it's interesting because it's both in freshwater aquaculture, but also mainly in marine aquaculture. And it's also not only fish, which is normally related to aquaculture, but is also, for example, seaweed and macroalgae and other species that are farmed. When we look into the global sector, it's interesting to see that China has been so moving forward. And if we look into areas where we do need to see an increased production, and that is mostly in areas, for example, in Africa, where there is a strong demand in terms of providing nutritious and healthy components to a balanced diet, and aquatic food is a very good means of doing that. We need to look into how can we increase the production if we don't want to rely on imports from other areas. And that is also true for areas like in Southeast Asia, which is actually also doing quite well when it comes to the production of aquatic foods. And I think it's interesting because we have this divide between a highly industrialized commercial aquaculture, and then we have a wide array of small-scale aquaculture production. And so the question really is what do we want to see in terms of the production? You might know or might not know that aquatic food is the most traded food commodity in the world. That means that a lot of the aquatic food that has been produced in a country doesn't stay in the country but is exported and imported by other countries, which means that there's a strong demand that is driven by an increasing preference for aquatic food, for example, in Europe and North America, where you could argue that that might not be the area where we do need to have aquatic food for nutritional purposes. We still have a lot of food insecure areas, but we have an increasing number of nutrition insecure areas where aquatic food can actually provide a meaningful contribution. And so the question really is in how can we invest in these small-scale aquaculture, which can produce aquatic food in the region locally, to actually go into that market and create the nutritious food for the people, rather than relying on the big industrial. And I think this is where it will be interesting to see how we can manage the growth in a way that it's actually keeping the food in the area where we do need the food. And I think that should be maybe our question when we think about increasing aquaculture production. Thank you.
That was a very short answer. It was. It was not a quip. Actually, James, I would like to ask you a slightly different, from a slightly different angle, because we can produce food. That's very nice. We seem not to be so good at using the food. So I understand that, I mean, most of us might know that 30–40% of the food end up as waste. So scholars of sustenance rescues that food, or some of it anyways, that would end up otherwise as indeed waste. It seems quite obvious, but can you at least take us through how you redistribute, how your redistribution of food, I think that's how you call it, does support food security? Again, it seems very obvious, but maybe you can take us through a little bit about how it works today, how it can work in the future as well.
So let me just start by saying that Scholars of Sustenance is a food rescue foundation that follows a non-traditional food banking method. So there are two types of food banking method. That's the traditional, which is the storing of food with warehouses needed. And also there's the prepared meal, or the non-traditional, where food rescue falls under too. So in that context, to answer Mr. Tichit's question, food banks exist in Asia Pacific for how many years already, and have been mobilizing food distribution to address food insecurity problems in this region. Go to Australia, it's a very successful food bank network there. The food bank in Vietnam is seeing an emerging progress. They're seeing a lot of growth in their operation. Great food bank in India in Malaysia, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, Singapore. You can name, there's a lot of food banks in this region that are trying to address the food insecurity problems. However, a number of them are following the traditional method, which is the more reactive approach, where they provide food when there's a need only, when there's a climate disaster, or when a needy comes to them and asks for food. But the good news is more and more food banks are now starting to stretch their arms and start doing food rescue to really alleviate hunger in those countries where they are operating. There are only a few organizations that are solely focused on food rescue, such as SOS. And Scholars of Sustenance have been operating for 8 years in Thailand, and we're also operating in Indonesia and Philippines. And what I can say is that with our sole focus on food rescue alone, we were able to harness and sharpen our tools and expertise when it comes to this. That's why in a span of 8 years, we were able to rescue already, actually as of yesterday, 10 million kilograms of food, which is equivalent to 42 million meals served to thousands of communities in different provinces in Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines. And not only we're creating that kind of impact, but there's also an environmental impact on that, because we're addressing food insecurity and food waste problems. And so in that 10 million kilograms of food, we were able to reduce the CO2 emission for a total amount of 25.3 million kilograms. And so with this method, we can simply understand that in addressing food insecurity problems, we don't need to buy more food to feed the hungry people. We don't need to produce more food to address the food insecurity problems. There is so much food available in this world for everyone. And yet there is a significant amount of people that still goes to bed hungry. And what we only need to do is, like what Mr. Teacher said, is to just redistribute those available food that are normally they end up in our landfills and produce bad gas, more harmful than CO2 actually, which is the methane gas, So we have enough food to feed the hungry people in this region. And if I may share, 50% of the food waste in the retail industry comes alone in Asia Pacific. So imagine if we just redirect all those available food and we just bring it to a lot of food insecure communities, we can already address this huge problem in this region. So we are here to share, and I'm proudly here to share that the success that we have seen in SOS, in the 3 countries that we're operating, imagine if we can replicate that across the region and multiply that huge impact. I think we can start addressing the food insecurity problems and really see a huge progress when it comes to this matter.
Thank you very much, James. I'll follow up something on that. But when your food distribution, do you need a minimum size of the food waste so that you can get some genuine impact or not? Sorry if I...
No, that's a good question, because probably some of you are wondering about that. So basically, the food that we collect are coming from the retail, manufacturing, hotel, restaurants. So there's a significant amount of food that can be collected on a daily basis. However, for the hotel industry, I'm happy to share that they have been significantly progressing when it comes to their food waste. They found different ways on how to address it, so it's becoming less and less based on our collections in those 3 countries. I'm not generalizing it across the region. And so, manufacturing, retail, huge amount of surplus food. And from that alone, we can already feed a lot of communities. But now we're also expanding our operation to agricultural industry, wherein we rescue surplus produces, because a lot of rejects, it is existing. The cosmetically good products are always taken by the retail company, and then the ugly produces, remains on the ground and not sold, and farmers will not, spend their money on and redistributing that because they'd rather allocate their budget to other things for their business. So that's where we come in and collect and rescue those food and redistribute those nutritious food. Still good, doesn't look good, but still nutritious and look good, and consumed by food insecure communities.
Thank you, James. So basically the lesson is eat your ugly greens. This sounds pretty inefficient, or this points out at pretty inefficient and supply chains which seem to be not so resilient, or that's not so good. Shea, may I ask you, if for you, how do you see that? How do you manage that resilience? How do you make more resilient supply chains? Diversity of food sources, more suppliers, economic viability. What proxies can you use to identify the resilience of a supply chain? Less waste.
So I'd say all of the above, but I think so. We are a manufacturing company in multi categories of food, where we import a lot of raw materials, but also use a lot of locally produced supply chain as well. And I think the most challenging, no risk mitigation could have prepared us for the pandemic, or followed by the economic crisis that Sri Lanka had. And that really stressed every possible supply chain mechanism we had. And I think the companies in the food industry that were able to really feed into the supply chain were those who were able to be agile. So now, in saying that, I just like to maybe bring some awareness into what we are talking about, because, for example, you were talking about palm oil, a very efficient source of oil. Soya is a very efficient form of protein. But, for example, in many countries, especially in the West, both these two ingredients are vilified. And I think we also have to look at, when you talk about diversity and food security for a country, you need to also look at the kind of crops that the different countries are manufacturing and what really is important, because there is so much focus, on niche markets today when countries. So if you take Sri Lanka, we have, 40% of our land is used, or more than 40% in agriculture, but it contributes 8% to the GDP. And a lot of business is focused on export and value addition, when there's still a lot of issues in nutrition and food security as well. We have, I think, about 25% post-harvest waste, in saying to what James was saying. So I think when we're talking about diverse food systems, we look at ourselves as a business, but I think we really need to integrate what's there in the country. To have food security in a country, you need to produce. And in a country like Sri Lanka, what we are not seeing sufficiently, something that doesn't sufficiently grow fast enough, is that value addition for sustainability. I mean, if you don't process food to a certain extent, the keeping qualities fall drastically. So it's about integrating all these things when you talk about a sustainable food system. And I think organizations like ourselves, we are in the forefront of this, but you need a lot more. And I think people also need to be educated more, the general public, because, again, I come back to the palm oil story. In many countries, you get palm-free products. So, it's just a 10% of a solution or a bit of information, which then propagates into a big story. And I think that's really dangerous, especially now when we're talking about food security, especially in disadvantaged countries.
Thank you, Shea. I'll just make a footnote. Sorry, I can speak about palm oil for hours, as you can imagine. But just a footnote on the palm oil free and not using palm oil. Interestingly enough, the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil allows its members to have palm oil free products, as long as you make it so that you explain that you do not put palm oil, not because you do not like palm oil, but because there's no palm oil in that product. End of story. But that was the result of long discussions, because on the producer side, we were pretty prickly about that. And on the consumer-facing companies, they were saying, well, but hold on a second, I'm not putting any palm oil in that product. I can't say it, right? And we had to eventually negotiate and come to the point that, do you say that because you're against that product? No, because there's no palm oil in that product. Then it's fine, just say so. And we managed to get an agreement, but that's an agreement between people who want to work together and not people who are chasing a niche. And I think you're making a very good point there about the niche and how that brings its own threats in itself. But would you say that a sustainable supply chain then is more resilient as well, or is it just more agile, which then leads it to be more resilient? How does it become more resilient then?
So I think if I look back again on how we worked through the pandemic, it was having this multitude of sources of supply, which makes so. But in a country like if you take Sri Lanka as an example, if we are to make supply chains more sustainable, we really need to have more value addition right along the supply chain, so that it adds value right across. Because again, it comes to the same: are we going to have people farming when they're the most marginalized income earners? So there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed when it comes to sustainability of a food supply chain and food security, for that matter.
So a fair redistribution of added value, or at least not a fair redistribution. We're not trying to create a socialist model, but at least to make sure that there is enough room for people to create value so that they will stay in the business, they will be able to invest in the business at every stage of the supply chain. Hopefully, that I wish you were heard by some supermarket chains, I know. But, and speaking of the private sector, James, how did you get the buy-in from the private sector? Did you have some magic formula that helped them figure out that it was in their best interest? How does that work?
Right. So, in Asia, it's a very in Asia Pacific, it's a very diverse region, and cultural sensitivity is also included in our approach. You know, maybe there are certain approach that could work in Europe or Northern America, where you can punish or shame. In Asia, what we did was the other way around. So what we did was we tried to understand the business first. You know, what is their business model? And then we tried to propose to them that we are their partners. You know, we are not someone to judge their business. We are not there to judge how they do things for their business. What we do is we illustrate and show to them, you know, what is the problem and what can we do together to solve that problem. And also, we don't actually use the guilt card to them, you know. Instead, we offer ourselves as their partners. We try to provide solution on how they can address their food waste problems, what they do wrong in their business in terms of waste, and then we encourage them to take action. Also, we use data for understanding, because SOS is a very data-driven organization. We have created an app or a system in our food collection so that we can gather all the data that we need so that we can illustrate this on a monthly basis, show the impact to all of our partners and understand. So acquiring or encouraging new partners will also require some data to show them that if others can do it, you can also do it. So we just show them, we illustrate everything to them so that they can be encouraged. And once they are encouraged, you know, we try to celebrate every win, because a lot of projects that are implemented sometimes can be successful in the beginning, but the consistency is another ball game. And so what we do is we really try to encourage them, and we recognize them publicly. You know, and whenever we have an event that we attend, whenever they do something huge in this endeavor, we recognize them. You know, so it's really a partnership. You know, because we tried in the beginning about, trying to make them guilty about their food waste, and it never worked. But when we switch our approach in a different format, then it started to work. And so all of the major companies in Thailand, especially in the Philippines now, we're getting all the huge conglomerates now, simply because they've seen the success in Thailand. It has worked. So name all the big food companies in Thailand. They're already donating their surplus food to SOS. So I would not say that this could work in all parts of the world, but I would say in this region, we used that approach and it worked.
So positive recognition. I'll come back. You were very, very shy on, or you were very short on data and technology. Can you, because that just baffles me. I still can't get my head around it. How do you manage that? So that's what I meant by, do you have a magic formula? Not so much in how you make them adhere to what you want them to do, but also how do you make it work, basically? How does technology really play a big role, or is it just a gimmick? Or sorry, not a gimmick, but is it just a nice addition, or is it really critical to what you do? And how do you develop that? How do you pay for it?
So I joined SOS 4 years ago, and it was following a very traditional method. I came from an industry where it is, and I also came from a company where it is very data-driven. And I already acknowledge the power of data and what it can bring to an organization. So that's one thing I brought into the organization. So one thing we did was we applied for a grant that will allow us to create an app that will allow us to gather all the data that we collect from each company. So all of our food rescue ambassadors, whenever they drive our cooling trucks, when they go collect food from each stop, they will weigh each food and they will input that in our app. And it will allow us to gather all the data on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, quarterly, whatever. So it allows us to create that system. This is not something that we just tell, but we have consistently used that because a lot of companies, I always say this, a lot of companies have their business language. And us coming from a non-business sector, what we need to do to win our partners from the business sector is to understand their language. And their language is all about data. They make decisions based on data. And so they will understand how to work with us when we present how data works in our system as well. And so once they learn that we use and capitalize on data, they realize, okay, they have a better system. We will trust them, and they did.
So basically, they use your system, and that gives them back information on what they have been doing, and that's accepted, and people are very happy doing it.
Correct, because they have something to report to their ESG reports, SDG reports, annual reports. They can measure and quantify the impact they have created.
Are you sure they're not putting their, sorry, maybe it's a French expression, but they're not putting their foot on the scale when they give a...
Well, we don't know, but as far as we can see, it has encouraged a lot of companies, particularly in Thailand, to start diving into their business model as soon as they started seeing the data that they got from us. It has influenced how they do their business after being our partner for quite some time, because they got something helpful for them to understand how they run their business.
So I'll follow up on that, because now I'm quite amused. How can you turn positively, or how does it work, that data? Because that data shows how wasteful they are, in a way, because you collect quite large amounts of food, isn't it? How does that become positive? Because they're not doing their planning very well now, are they? I mean, they're making money at the end of the day, because I'm sure they're charging for all that food.
Correct.
But it's a lot more food than they're actually using. How does that, are you not afraid? You were mentioning a bit earlier that you're going upstream. Are you going upstream because there's a reduction? Because of your work, you're basically running yourselves out of business?
Yeah, so that's a good follow-up question. So it turned out to be positive because, like what I said, they finally understood where are the gaps in their business model. Like, for example, before they've been purchasing a lot of specific ingredients, they realize they have a lot of waste on that. Now they're becoming savvy in terms of planning whatever purchases they need. I'm talking about the hotel industry. They are now understanding how they are wasting food items before, And now they're becoming more knowledgeable on how they are purchasing those items. And so it's helping them in terms of their budgeting, saving cost. So that's why I said it's becoming positive, because we're influencing how they do business just because of the data that we provide to them, which is not available before.
Yes, that was not available before. That's the key element. Before it just went into the bin and that was the end of it. Okay. Cher, does it resonate with you? Because James was just talking about the data and how businesses suddenly realized what was going on. Does it resonate with you, the use of data, technology? Does it really change? Are you still evolving there? Does it? How does that work for you?
So if I take our manufacturing businesses, so we run on very sophisticated ERP systems where there's a lot of data generated and it's very easy to manage. But we're also in retail, and I can see exactly what James said. We also have hot food preparation in our supermarkets, and there is a lot of waste created, and there is so much opportunity really to do better, and there's very little data. They weigh the waste at the end of the day, and it's not even, it's expressed as a percentage at the end of the month, which is very small, but actually in real terms, it's something that could add a lot of value.
And so that's on the waste side. On the supply chain side, do you see data as being? You said you have a very nifty.
So
ERP.
again, it depends where. So we work with about 20,000 farmers in Sri Lanka. So on the agriculture supply side, where we get involved, we are very data driven, and we're also we're providing what we call smart agriculture initiatives to educate our farmers, to get them savvy. We are digitalizing payments. We are introducing them to a system, but that's still very small. And yeah, in where I think where the company is involved in, we have a lot of data, and I don't think any of that food really goes waste because it gets sold or reused or whatever. But in saying that, there is over 25% post-harvest waste in general. Those are the numbers that are being thrown around.
Yes, indeed. I mean, that does not really improve over time, it seems. Maybe to take one step back to Jörn, to ask you about. So we've talked a lot about data, but maybe we should talking a bit about technology and how does that work for smaller communities? Because we've been at the consumer-facing end. How does it work for smaller communities? The introduction of, do you need really a lot of technology to have resilient aquatic food production at smaller communities or not? Or is it just a matter of getting people started and it will work on its own?
And that's a very, very interesting question, Olivier. And I was listening very fascinated because, I mean, we are also, as much as, I'm losing my speaker thing. Well, I hope I can still continue. That's good. So, so it's quite interesting to listen to that because, I mean, in the end, what we also need from the small-scale sector is data, because a lot of the knowledge that we are generating about how we can improve is related to, to knowing what is happening, and that is, of course, related to data, and that is coming from the fishery sector as well as from the aquaculture sector. But your question is going into a different direction, I assume, and do we need more technology? That's a very good question. At the core, we don't necessarily need a lot of technology, but I think we can benefit, and also the small-scale aquaculture farmers can benefit from technology. The question here is, how do we ensure that the technology that we provide is actually being used in a good way? And we heard earlier that you probably, when you're looking into upscaling and you're looking into how can we invest in the aquaculture sector or the fishery sector for that matter, or in any other food production sector, you're investing and you want to increase the production because that is where the income is generated for the ones that are producing. But that is also relevant because you need to feed into supply chains, and you want to have that in a way that you actually keep on having the diverse food availability that a lot of us actually want. If we are going, and the reason why we have so much food waste is because we want to have that diversity. If we would just feed kind of the needs in terms of nutritional value, then we could do much better. But then we would go probably into a supermarket, and then the question is, you know, what would we see? Not the diversity that we see today. So the question really is how to do that in a way that you can foster that, and you support also the production that stays in those local communities that are dependent on the food production. And that is specifically interesting when you're looking into aquatic food, because as I said earlier, aquatic food demand is relatively high. That means that the price that people are willing to pay for aquatic food is relatively high, which means that as an aquaculture producer, for example, in Asia or Africa or anywhere else, I would rather sell all of my production to the global market rather than keeping part of it for myself and my local community to actually provide nutritious food into my community. So I'm generating income, and with that income I'm buying whatever I want to buy, and that is of course a huge variety, including food, but probably not as nutritious as the food could be if I would, for example, rely on aquatic food, which is an interesting thing when you think about it. And so back to the technology part. So how do you bring the technology in, and how do you ensure that then when you're bringing in the technology, it does not necessarily just lead to aggregation, and maybe that is where you want to go. Maybe you want to reduce the number of small-scale farmers and fish farmers and fisheries, because that aggregation is what led to the development of agriculture in Europe and North America. You know, you're increasing the income of the individual, and that was also bringing more people out of the primary sector, where as a country, from a country perspective, this is where you generate economic growth. I mean, if you keep everyone in the primary sector, that is probably not where as a country you produce a lot of economic growth, which is also an interesting aspect. So how do we bridge that, you know, and not ending up in a situation where we are, where we have a lot of these large-scale producers, which probably is also not the way to go, because we see that this is actually decreasing resilience rather than increasing resilience, but rather develop the sector in a way that we increase the resilience, but we're also going into a direction where we increase the income. So, you know, having the food production as a means of increasing income. Because I mean, that could be also a different way of looking at it. If we would get rid of poverty, that would immediately get we would immediately get rid of all the food insecurity and the nutrition insecurity, because people would be able to pay for the food. So this is a little bit of where we have the divide in I think in the way we're looking at it. So at the moment when we develop, and we are research for development organization, that means that we are looking into means of improving the situation of small-scale fishers and small-scale fish farmers, which is partly also related to technology. For example, improving farming practices, you know, going to, you know, also smart aquaculture techniques, where you think like, oh, this is too much technology. Who is able to maintain that technology in the areas where you normally don't have the means of, for example, having technicians that could, you know, cater for that? Where can we bring in the technology so that we have that uptake, but it also actually contributes to the production and also for the benefit of the small-scale fishers and fish farmers. So it is an interesting question, but I think this is where we need to go, and this is where we need to go in growing and realizing that a food system transformation requires us to actually look into the technologies that we have increasingly available. And I mean, there is no, looking into new ways of producing food, and meaning that we also want to maybe more localize food production. But we also want to localize food production in a way that we can still keep the diversity of food production. And that means, for example, in terms of aquaculture, it is probably not that we have a simple aquaculture, but we are looking into polyculture. So we are, you know, looking into systems that can produce not only one species, but maybe many species. Maybe we're looking into integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, where we're not only producing fish, but also seaweed, also mussels. Or we also look into systems where we have integrated aquaculture, agriculture systems, where we do produce fish together with, for example, vegetables. And these integrated systems, I think, they nicely scale up in a relatively local and regional way. They don't nicely scale up and into hundreds of hectares of production system. And I think this is the way where we need to look. And this is where I think we can introduce technology in a very, very nice way. Because again, to understand the way that we can produce in the most meaningful way requires data, and that we actually have a ability to track what is happening. But it doesn't necessarily completely rely on that, because there's a lot of traditional knowledge available that we can rely on when it comes to this production. So maybe it's not only technology, but it's social innovation that we're looking into, and that social innovation that is sometimes also looking backwards and trying to rely on the traditional ways of producing, but in a modern way.
So basically using data and not being data led, but so the innovation can use the data, but not being led by the data or
Yes.
lost in the data.
Correct.
All right. Thank you for that. That made it remarkably simple, almost. I would like to have, now we have a little bit of time left, I would like us to touch on the one item we've not touched, which might be of slight importance, the consumer. So I'll start with you, James. You've been apparently quite successful with the businesses. What about the consumers? Do they even see what you're doing? I mean, apart people who might receive, obviously, the food that's being rescued, but does the normal consumer, the consumer of one of those hotels or restaurants, do they understand, or do they see? Do they need to do something as well, or should they just go business as usual for them?
Another good question. Okay. We'd like to believe that there is an influence that we have created to the consumers. However, there's no measurement on that, because we can only measure our influence to the business sector. And we've seen significant changes on how some businesses have been doing, or have been approaching their surplus food in their business. And so I believe it trickles down to their consumers, because what we notice, for example, for some retail companies, they already incorporated the food waste aspect to their KPIs to their employees. And so for the hotel industry, they have already started acquiring different apps to measure their food waste, just because of the influence we have created with the program that we run. And so I think, the impact or the influence is there already. But I cannot just measure, but I believe so.
All right, you've got a tough job there, I think. But Jan, very briefly, can we get people to eat more aquatic foods, or is it just fine? Are people already eating their greens and their aquatic foods, or do they need more encouragement?
Well, that as a scientist, I can say that depends. Is always my answer. Well, that depends, because you have areas where they actually like eating seafood. As I said before, there's an increasing demand in areas in like Europe, North America, but also Asia. I mean, you have a lot of aquatic food consumption. But we can do better, because aquatic food plays such a crucial role in serving, this nutritious and healthy diet. And it's about preferences. And yes, we can do better. And one way that we are working on that is actually through school feeding programs, where we are going into schools and we're using aquatic foods either as food additives, like for example fish powder or seaweed powder that can, supplement or being used in the recipes, or directly serving aquatic food, and actually letting the kids learn how to consume aquatic food and how to appreciate aquatic food, which also means at the end, of course, that we need to increase the production.
Hopefully, apparently. Shea, can I ask you, for your company, when these kids have grown, and well, they are consumers already, I guess, when you develop new products, or when you look at what you have to do, or what you're producing, are you going to produce based on what people want or on what they should be eating? Do you consider how you can grow or diversify what you're offering or what you're using as ingredients based on what is more sustainable, more resilient, or just on, and which would be fair as well, just on what market wants? Is it a one-way street, or do you have some influence on what the market wants?
No, I believe we do. So one of the things for example, as an organization, what we're doing is trying to see in those supply chains where we're importing a lot of our raw materials, can we add more locally grown agriculture supply chain into it? And I think you can, that there's a lot of awareness today on sustainable, what people, I would say perceive sometimes. If you take plant-based food, it's a big topic. There are a lot of young people today who are opting not to eat meat. So there is opportunity, and then with that, that's technology. I think the technology we have, the extrusion technology we have today, you can actually eat food that is nutritionally very good, tastes like meat, and harm no animals. On the other side of that, you get the cellular production of meat, that really high-tech side of it. Again, there's this whole discussion on animal cruelty, also the environmental impact on animal husbandry. So there are so many questions going on, and I think this is where technology plays a huge role. And the short answer to what you said, yeah, I think industry can influence, because it's up to us to innovate and give solutions to changing lifestyles.
So basically not dictating, but like you said, innovate, propose, and try to get people to adhere or to realize the value of what you're proposing. Well, that sounds like a very good business model. I think we should be asking questions to the audience. So does anybody have a question? If you have questions, please, can you introduce yourself briefly and say to whom you're directing the question, and ask, if possible, a brief and clear question. Any questions? Any hands up? No? Oh, come on. Yes. I don't know. Do we have a mic to get across? Oh yeah. Sorry, you can press the red button. It won't exactly. It won't be a shock. We hear you just fine.
Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Mevan. I'm from an organization called Hatch in Sri Lanka. I think I'd just like to touch. This question is kind of, two ways, both to John as well as to Shia, about smallholder farmers. As you know, particularly in this region, we have a lot of emphasis on smallholder farmers and a lot of initiatives and interventions targeting the sustainability of smallholder farmers. But as you said, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because as long as smallholder farmers remain small, therein lies the problem. So in that transition, have you all seen some kind of case studies, maybe John, maybe you can allude to in your industry, and maybe share, because you do work with 20,000 odd smallholder farmers, as you mentioned earlier. How do you see that being applicable to places like Sri Lanka or even India or elsewhere in progressing that in a holistic way, as opposed to just looking at the sustenance of the individual?
If I have the mic, I'll start. What we find, I don't think the term is, it doesn't matter if you're a small-scale farmer having, a few acres of land. It's really how productive your land is. And I think that's where the technology drive and education. Sri Lanka, for example, has a big opportunity to really improve our agriculture output. And I think that emphasis is not enough. And this is how you make sustainable. The other thing which I brought up at another, we need to have an ecosystem where there is sufficiently enough income generated to the producer on the land. And there are a lot of community. I always think like the primary processing, what I call, of many foods can be done at community level, which means you can get a community endeavor where more money goes back into the community. And I think as long as people are making enough money, there's going to be interest of people staying in producing. And I think the equation is not very even now in countries like emerging countries like ours. So that's what we need to address.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I take two examples. And one is where we see that one of the issues that small-scale fish in aquaculture enterprises face is the cost of inputs, which means, for example, the feed and other inputs. And the way of overcoming that and also gaining market power and being able to actually get the inputs for a lower price is that they start cooperating in either corporations or associations. So that's one way of doing it, so that they actually are able to decrease the input. which also means that you create a dynamic where they might actually buy out of each other, and so then they move out at one point out of the sector. Which then automatically you have an own internal dynamic, but it's driven internally rather than being a pressure from the outside. And the second example is where you're diversifying your production, where you're diversifying in a way that you actually produce not only, for example, fish for the local communities, but you also start producing fish. And polyculture systems are a very good example of that, where small-scale fish farmers are producing several species, and part of that goes into the export market where they're generating the income, and then they're actually creating, using small indigenous species, for example, to serve the local market. And so this is two ways I think that they can overcome that. But in both ways, over time, you still see that there's a switch. So once you're becoming more wealthy, then you start, either moving out of the sector, or you're actually starting buying out others from the sector to grow. And so I think this is what we typically see.
I'll just add a little bit on palm oil. Sorry, I really can't help myself.
Well, palm oil in a tree is just a fish, and the fish is just a tree.
We have an interesting issue in palm nowadays, is that it sometimes is too productive, or it's too beneficial for the farmer. I'll join Jörn on that one. What I mean by that is that it's a very intensive crop. It's a monoculture, and it's a cash crop. It's not something you can use yourself. I mean, you can make a bit of cooking oil, but that's definitely not in the culture in Indonesia or Malaysia or in most of the countries, except outside of Africa, people will not use naturally palm fruitlets to make cooking oil at the village level. The problem we have is the following. We know that monoculture is not perfect. We believe that it's not so resilient to climate change, and we would love the farmers, small farmers, to be more resilient. It's in our best interest as well, don't take me wrong. We want more palm produce so that our business stays afloat as well. We need a lot of it, so we're happy to see a lot of production. But we think a couple of years ahead, or we try to think a few years ahead. How do we get them to diversify? It's a very hard proposition. It's maybe similar to what you were saying earlier. It's very hard to say because it's a very good cash income. How do you tell small farmers in particular, who are quite vulnerable, how do you tell them, well, I've got that great idea, you're going to reduce your planted area by 25%, and you're going to put trees and have some vegetable and other stuff, and you'll see it will be just fine. Very hard sell. So it's a lot of education, I think, Shea, you were saying, a lot of education as well. How do we convince them?
Actually, in Sri Lanka, we're seeing, so palm, I'm not sure about palm and whether you can undercrop. But with coconut, which is our big crop, we're seeing a lot of undercropping, which is possible, which is giving an additional cash income. And that's working really well, actually. So that they're getting much more productivity of the land.
Palm is a jealous crop. It's pretty... it's very good at what it does, but it doesn't like... It's like having a cat. Yes. Sorry, please, go ahead. Oh, it's again the Sri Lankan team. I mean, seriously, you're getting all the medals today, I'm afraid. Go ahead.
So my name is Harsha Purasinghe. My question is to James. Very interesting model. I'm curious to know, apart from the impact reporting they do they get tax incentives as well, or are you working with the governments to get tax incentives for those? That's one. The second thing, do you use technology to do the supply and demand matching? Because how do you really do that? That's something. And third, finally, how do you intend to scale?
Thank you. So when it comes to tax incentives, unfortunately, the tax system in Thailand is quite different. Especially for a foundation like us, our operational cost is more higher than the usual. So we're not exempted on that. However, we found other ways, legal ways, okay. We found other ways to make sure that the companies gets rewarded for participating and donating to SOS. And that's what we do to encourage the companies, and that's what they've been doing. However, there are also exceptions on that rule. But what we saw was a lot of companies are started to become so committed about this that regardless if they don't get any tax exemption, they will still donate to us, because I guess they reached the point that they are now dealing with their conscience about the amount of food that they throw, because they know that this amount of food that can be consumed by people are, they're just wasting it. So there's that kind of influence already in the industry. Second, we use the technology to do the matching. Yes. So we integrate the donors and also the recipients at this point. So for us to become more efficient, because we have a limitation on our fleet. Thailand is so huge, Philippines is so huge, Indonesia is very huge. So we cannot collect all the surplus food. So we created a network of recipients that will allow us to make them collect the food instead of us, and will allow the donors to trust those recipients to collect the food directly from them. So we have created that kind of influence already in that system as well. And then third, scaling our capacity is the most difficult one, because I was sharing it with her a while ago. We are not funded by the government nor any specific private company. We raise our own funds. And so far, Thailand is the only one who's financially independent, meaning we are able to gather enough donors to sustain our operations. However, for Indonesia and Philippines, we're still not independent. And so we're navigating that path, which that is our battle cry. If only the government can support this initiative, not just the SOS, this kind of initiative, we can address huge problem in this region.
Well, thank you very much, James, and I'm glad to hear there's still some morality out there. I think on that positive note, I'm afraid we have our time's up. I've been told a few times already. So I think I'll thank everyone for your questions. I thank in particular the Sri Lankan team. You seem to have done very, very well today, but you came in strength. Shermani, you've been bringing people with you, haven't you? And I think we can. I would like to call Mr. Ratnesh to give us some maybe summarize a little bit of the high notes of what he heard today. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. And again, I would add my voice to what you just said about Sri Lanka network. Excellent, Janani. Lot of hard work. I must congratulate the Sri Lankan network. Excellent and very topical. I just have a wish, just like devil's advocate. The future-proofing food security for whom? That got slightly diffused, so maybe the next edition we could have. Is it for the small-scale farmer, farm holder, that, or for the middle class, or for the big companies? But having said that, because the specialists were so well endowed and well researched, that I think that thing got mitigated to a large extent. And I must compliment, my speaker tag also goes down. We got such wonderful insights into the palm oil and the region where we are located. Thanks to Oliver, your rich experience, and I would definitely like to take up your invitation to learn more about it, because you can talk a lot about it. But future-proofing, farming, these innovations, to what end? And that is where I would like to take up Yon's interventions, which were very good. And it echoes with what Ila Ben, our noted social thinker and leader, who founded the Seva network, she also, that food must be consumed within a certain kilometer periphery, so that it reduces the burden on the. So I think your, especially aquatic food being transported to huge and in a refrigerated kind of large ships, I mean, those things also need to, and especially whether we are in the aim of earning money, whether we are fighting the nutrition challenge. So that, I think you touched a very, very relevant chord. And then I liked James' ideas. I mean, 3 countries, you can do so much. Imagine we have 193 countries and many more SOSs required. And while I was listening to you, I was reminded of Amartya Sen's seminal work, which got him the Nobel, which talked about the poor. I mean, there was never lack of food availability. It was the purchasing power. And that, I think, Yon as well as James, they touched upon it. And the whole arbitraging this information using modern technology and data, not as a master but as a servant. I mean, that I think really, really was a very relevant point which came out in today's meeting. And then, last but not least, your group, and the phenomenal work you did during the pandemic, and more so, all those learnings you have incorporated now in being agile and more customer friendly. So it's not only about chasing balance sheet numbers, but also sustainability, also redistribution. I think a very relevant, I'm sure all of you will agree with my summary that this session, this 1 hour that we spent here was very productive, very thought-provoking, and really, really appreciative of all of you. Thank you so much, and let's give a big round of applause.
Thank you very much, Ratnesh. Well, that brings this session to an end. I think I would like to thank everyone for being a very patient crowd with us and very attentive. I would like to thank in particular the panelists for all their shared insights and for putting up with my questions as well. Thank you very much.
The panelists and please have a group photo first. I think they'll be standing to the center. Okay, now. Oh, sorry. I invite everyone, the guests, participants, to come to the middle for a group photo. Everyone, please move to the middle for a group photo. Yeah. Yeah. I think I need to move back a bit. Yeah. Stand. Yeah. Everyone, please stand up for a group photo. Move to the middle. Wait a second. All right. Yeah, panelists and final judge. Please. Yeah. Your side, please. All right. So please stand up. Yeah. If not, you won't be able to see you. Say. Okay. Yes. Everyone. Okay, nice. Wait, let me find my position.
All of this is digital, it can be shared.
All right, so for your information, please gather at the lobby as we will have buses to bring you to Sheraton for the gala dinner. And the bus will bring you back here if you have car here. Thank you everyone for your participation.
so much. It was great. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for all the preparation.
Yes, it was so organic. I really enjoyed it.